more of that? It's the Holy Spirit? Let's get some more of that going in this room tonight, you guys. I'm ready to have church. Are you guys ready to have church tonight? I want to let you know, the same degree, I'm a feedback junkie. I love when people are excited. It gets me excited. So if you guys want an even better experience with receiving the word tonight, just stay this level of excited throughout the entire service. Awesome. We got the radioactive colors going behind me. We're going to have a great time tonight. You guys can put up the house lights a little bit more. If you guys brought your Bibles, I want you to be able to read it. How many guys brought a Bible tonight? Let me see some Bibles if you guys got Bibles. Awesome. We're going to hop into those in just a second. Before we get started, how many of you guys, you're relatively new here? You're relatively new here. Awesome. Lots of new people. Turn to somebody that just raised their hand and say, welcome. Now turn to the person you know, been here for a while, and say, stop lying. We know you. Some of you guys just looking for attention. Let me introduce myself. My name is Pastor Daniel. Can I give you guys a couple of stats about me, some interesting little nuggets, some Daniel trivia, just to start off? Yeah. Just to kind of like segue into the message tonight. So I am relatively tall. I'm almost tall. I'm 6'2". And I grew up in the Los Angeles area, and I was homeschooled most of my life, but I did go to a school when I was younger. I went to a school called Woodruff Christian School, and my teacher's name was Mrs. Bultice. That's a ridiculous name, but that was her name. We called her Mrs. B for short. My favorite book outside of the Bible to read is a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. So that's a little bit about me. I hope to get to know you a little bit later and talk about you. And I want to see, I'm going to come back to some of those figures and statistics and trivia in just a second. But before I do, I want to tell you guys a funny story. How many guys like stories? Awesome. Some of you guys, you are a child trapped in a grown-up's body, and you're like, this is the best part of the service, this is story time. I want to tell you a story about a president named Franklin Roosevelt. You guys heard of Franklin Roosevelt? So Franklin Roosevelt was a very popular president. He was very loved at the time, and a lot of people would come to the White House to see him. Has anybody ever met a president? Anybody in here, you've met a president? You met a president? Which president did you meet? Donald Trump? You met him? Cool, man. Before or after he was president? Before? Cool. A little less cool, but still cool. Congratulations. Congratulations. So not many people have met a president, right? One guy sitting in here has met a president. That's pretty awesome. I'm going to shake your hand later, and it's, I technically met Donald Trump too. So, but a lot of people would come to the White House to see Franklin Roosevelt, and he used to just, after a while, he got annoyed of it. Like, we all have dreams of being famous and people coming to see us, but it would get annoying after a while. And what he was noticing was that all these people would come to see him, but nobody would actually listen to him. And people would come up to shake his hand, and there would be these long greeting lines where people would come up, and nobody would ever ask him any questions. Everybody would just come and try and talk to him. And so he started getting annoyed because he's like, nobody cares what I have to say. So he decided one day, I'm going to put it to the test and see if I can get away with saying something and see if anybody is even listening to what I have to say. And so people would come up to him and they'd shake his hand, and as they would shake his hand, they'd be like, hey, Mr. President, so happy to meet you. My name is blah, blah, and they'd just start gushing, and every single person that came up, because a long line would form to shake his hand, and every single person that came up, he would listen to what they have to say, he would shake their hand, and then he would smile and say, I murdered my grandmother this morning. Did you guys catch that? I murdered my grandmother this morning. And he'd just smile, and they'd be like, oh, okay, nice to meet you, Mr. President, congratulations, And every single person would come to shake his hand, and he'd be like, hi, I murdered my grandmother this morning. And they're like, it's so nice to meet you, Mr. President, you're doing a great job, you keep it up. And every person would come and shake his hand, and he'd say, I murdered my grandmother this morning. I am so happy to be here with you today, you're a fantastic man. Every single person would come up, I murdered my grandmother this morning. And he went through an entire line of people that came to the White House to meet him, to get to know him, to shake his hand, and nobody reacted to the information he was giving them. Until he gets to the very end of the line. At the end of the line is a foreign dignitary, an ambassador that had come to the White House. He's a very distinguished man. And he's at the end of the line, and he comes up to the front to shake President Roosevelt's hand, and he grabs President Roosevelt's hand, and President Roosevelt says, hello, I murdered my grandmother this morning. And the man leans into his ear and whispers, I'm sure she deserved it. Have you ever felt like nobody's listening to what you're saying? Has anybody ever felt like nobody is listening to what I'm saying? Some of you guys, this is my mom and she can sit somewhere else. Ushers, can you grab her and take her somewhere else? We have a space for disrespectful people way in the back, Mom, if you want to go over there. You ever feel like nobody is listening? Some of you guys, you're not listening as I'm preaching this message. You're like, what's he talking about? But we all have those situations where we feel like nobody is listening, and we all feel like nobody is listening to us. Would you guys raise your hand if you ever feel like people just don't listen to you? Raise your hand up high, be honest. You feel like people just don't listen to me. Nobody listens when I talk, especially if you're a parent. If you're a parent, nobody really does listen to you. Nobody's listening. Does anybody listen in this house? Am I taking crazy pills? And so I have a question for you tonight. Are you listening? So I have a pop quiz for you. I'm going to go up to individual people and ask you if you remember some of the details I shared about myself earlier today. Do you remember how tall I am?
Yeah, 6'2".
Great, good job. Do you remember the name of my school that I went to? Oh man, he doesn't remember the name of the school I went to. Does anybody remember, do you remember my teacher's name? It started with Miss B for short. Almost there. Almost there. Man. Buddy, do you remember the name of my favorite book? Thank you. Thank you. By Dale Carnegie. That's my guy. He not only listens, but he's read the book. But let's be perfectly honest. As soon as I said I want to share some information about myself, some of you guys are like, check out. Right? Like some of you guys are nice. I appreciate that. But like usually when somebody starts talking about themselves, can we be perfectly honest? We check out. Especially if they go for a while. Because if we're being honest, most of us, we want to talk, but we don't want to listen. We want to talk, but we don't want to listen. And my question tonight is, how good of a listener are you? So I want you guys, we're going to take a little test. You guys ready to take a test? 3 people. You guys are nerds. Everybody else want to take a test tonight? So we're going to take a test. I'm going to ask you 5 questions, yes or no answers. Are you guys ready? I want you to grade yourself. The average person, just so you know this, the average person thinks 4 times faster than the average person speaks. So the average person thinks 4 times faster than the average person speaks. Some of you guys, it's a little different. You're on the opposite end of that spectrum. And somebody talks faster than you think. I don't know. Not pointing any fingers tonight. But the average person thinks 4 times faster than the average person talks. So my question for you is, do you use this time to think about other things while you're keeping track of the conversation? You ever find yourself doing that where somebody's talking and you're like thinking of you're doing your income tax, you're thinking about the game that's on later tonight, and you're like, and you're thinking about other things? Do you ever do that, yes or no? Okay. My second question, do you check out on conversations that you don't find interesting? Okay. Next question, do you judge from a person's appearance or their delivery whether or not you're going to care about what they have to say? Number 4, do you pretend to be paying attention when you're not? Husbands. My last question, do certain words or phrases prejudice you so you can't listen objectively? There's certain words that people say, and the second they say it, you're like, done. It's like a trigger word. You know, for me, there's a word, the word is the word overwhelmed. When I hear people say overwhelmed, immediately my heart gets hard to what they have to say. I don't know why. It's just something about the words. Just so many people have said it to me that when you say overwhelmed, I'm like, baby, you know? I don't know why. So now you guys know if you ever say the word overwhelmed, you're like, I got to find a different word because that is a word that Pastor Ian doesn't like. Another word I don't like is cotton. I don't know why, but I don't like the word cotton. If you say cotton to me, I don't like you. Don't like you. So find a different word, whatever, but don't say cotton because I hate it. Why? Because there was somebody I used to know that used to say cotton. And it bugged me so much that now whenever I hear the word cotton, it is ruined for me. So I have difficulty listening to what you have to say if you use some of those words. Am I the only one? I feel like I'm just having a therapy session. Is anyone else? We go through this, right? So I'm sure that most of you answered yes to all of those questions. If you answered yes to all those questions, you're probably not very good at listening, and we have room to grow. And I want to talk about listening tonight because as a society, we have lost the art of listening. We don't listen anymore. See, social media, I think, has even made the issue worse because it's a platform that encourages us more to speak than to understand. If we're on Facebook or Twitter, wherever you are, TikTok, whatever you're at, the objective is for you to put information out there. It's for you to put information out there. The objective is for you to share your perspective and not to understand what somebody else is going through. And it's been interesting to me to look around society lately, particularly in the past month, and just see the chaos that comes when people don't understand each other. When we don't understand one another, we become disunified. When we don't listen to each other, we can't understand each other. Are you with me tonight? If you want to be unified with people, if you want to have profitable relationships, you have to be able to listen to somebody else, because when you listen to them, truly listen to them, you can understand them a little bit better. And when you understand them, you can grow together in unity. Am I preaching to anybody tonight? Remember how excited you guys were with the music? Should I bring the band back up and play behind me, or are you guys good? Calm down, I'm not doing that. It's a rhetorical question, chill. Proverbs chapter 18, if you guys have your Bible, turn there. There's actually two verses I want to read tonight in Proverbs chapter 18. The first is in Proverbs chapter 18, verses 2. And it says this, Proverbs 18, verse 2 says, "Fools have no interest in understanding. They only want to air their own opinions." Fools have no interest in understanding. They only want to air their own opinions. You ever meet somebody like this? Like, they're not trying to understand where you're coming from. They're not trying to understand the situation. They just want to make you understand their perspective on said situation. The Bible calls those types of people fools. They don't have an interest in understanding. They just want to put their opinion out there. Maybe you know somebody like that. Maybe you are somebody like that, where every conversation you get into with somebody, you just want them to know how you feel, what you're going through, what your struggle is, what your past has looked like, but you're not interested in understanding who they are, what they're going through, what they're experiencing. That is the mark of a foolish person who is not willing to listen or understand somebody on the other side. Also in Proverbs chapter 18, looking at verse 13, it says this, "Spouting off before listening to the facts is both shameful and foolish." Shouting off before listening to the facts is both shameful and foolish. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had an opinion on something before you knew all the facts? Have you ever found yourself in a position where all you hear is a headline and you already have an opinion on the headline before you understand the facts behind it? And it's so funny because you see so much of that nowadays. I mean, you see that all over the place. And social media makes it worse because sometimes we just see a caption or a picture and automatically we have opinions on the situation without knowing the facts behind it. I remember one time there was a friend of mine, and he was a pastor as well, and he shared an article. How many of you guys know Elevation Church? Pastor Stephen Furtick, you guys have heard of them. He shared an article, and it was so funny. In this article, it said, the headline was, "Elevation Church adds water slide to their baptism tank." That was the headline. And there was a picture of the stage at Elevation Church, and they had a baptismal in the stage and a giant, like, party water slide going down into it. And this person shared it and was like, "I can't believe it. These giant mega churches, they're turning away from God. It's all about a party and it's all about having fun. And this is so sacrilegious and this is so hypocritical. And I can't believe this church and I'll never listen to anything from this pastor again." And I looked in the comments and people are going in on this church. How dare they add a water slide to the baptism tank? This is awful. How dare they? Are they even Christians anymore? All this stuff. And I clicked on the article, and at the top of the web page, there was a giant banner for the website that this article was on, and it said Babylon Bee, a satire website. Giant letters at the top of this article was that this was a satire website. What they do is post fake stories as jokes, right? They intentionally post fake stories as jokes. So this person was furious because they saw a headline that upset them, and they already had opinions, and they jumped to an opinion without getting the facts. So they're not willing to listen, they just want to have an opinion. And a lot of times, when we jump to opinions without listening, it's because we already have an opinion, and we have found something that has confirmed our opinion, and we're not interested in listening. We just want somebody to agree with us so that we don't have to listen to you. Because if you agree with me, then I don't have to listen to you, because you're obviously wrong, because I have somebody else over here that agrees with me. So I read a headline and I jump to an opinion because I'm not interested in change. I'm not interested in examining my way of thinking. If I don't like Elevation Church and I see an article that says they have a water slide into their baptism, that's a great article for me to find, because I already have an opinion about them, and this article just helps enhance my already negative opinion. Does that make sense? But we don't like to listen. We don't like to, we're just looking for things that confirm what we already believe, because we don't really want to understand somebody else. You see it all across social media. Like people, it's amazing to me in the pandemic and the political unrest we're experiencing right now, how quick people are to share misinformation. Have you guys ever seen somebody share like a photoshopped picture of somebody, but they're passing it off as real? It's like, that's not a real person. You know what I mean? They've got like Donald Trump riding on like a dragon. You're like, that didn't happen in real life. You know? They'll Photoshop a witch hat on somebody, like all kinds of stuff. But people will share it because it confirms their opinions. And at the end of the day, our emphasis is always on our own perspective. Our emphasis is always on our own perspective, and we get angry easily when someone disagrees with us, don't we? Anybody? Like even about petty stuff, right? Like, what's the best football team in the world? Somebody said Patriots? The Patriots are awful, bro. Patriots are awful. Patriots are awful. They're not even patriotic. But the minute that he said the Patriots, somebody said, ugh. Who was that, right? Somebody said Patriots and somebody else said, why? Because it's like something so stupid as a football team, but this guy is willing to like throw up over some other guy liking a terrible team. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? And some of you guys are really happy that I'm mocking the Patriots because that just emphasizes your opinion. So you haven't been listening either. And all the Patriot fans are clapping because this is an awkward night. This is an awkward night. But we get angry easily when somebody disagrees with us, don't we? Have you ever had somebody insult your favorite restaurant or your favorite food? Oh, Popeyes is the best chicken, Like, get away from me with that Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich. Like, we get mad when somebody disagrees with us. We get so mad. It's so hilarious to me how easy it is for all of us, myself included, to get mad when somebody else has a perspective that is different than ours. Why? Because the emphasis is on our own perspective and we're not interested in listening. Why do you like that better? Why do you think that it's not good? Are you understanding what I'm saying tonight? See, the Bible tells us, if you have your Bibles, turn to James chapter 1, verses 19. I want you to mark this verse down. This is an incredibly powerful and important verse in the Bible that we all should commit to memory. James chapter 1, verses 19. When you're there, say, I'm there. Somebody wasn't listening. I said, say I'm there, and he said, yeah, but it's cool. It's cool. It's cool. I'll take it. All right. James chapter 1, verse 9. It says, understand this. Understand this. You guys ready to understand something? Thanks, one person. You guys ready to understand something? It says, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to, slow to, and slow to get. We're going to do this again because you guys were not in step, okay? You guys would make a terrible chorus line. Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters, you must all be quick to, listen, slow to, speak, and slow to get angry. Awesome. We got the Hulk lights behind me because we should not get angry. But reality check. Would you say that this verse mirrors your disposition? Would you say that this verse reflects how you handle conflict? Anybody? Sometimes. We've got it out of order though, don't we? We've got it out of order. If we're being honest, the majority of the time, we've got it out of order. We are quick to speak, aren't we? We're very quick to speak. Oh yeah, well, what about? Oh, come on, man, you know that. We're quick to speak. We're quick. Some of us are quicker than others. Like literally, guys, it's one of the biggest things that gets me in trouble in my life is my mouth, because I'm quick-witted and passionate. You know, like a lot of people, you guys ever get into an argument with somebody and then late at night you're thinking like, oh man, I wish I would have said that. I don't have that problem. I lay in bed at night and I'm like, I can't believe I said that. I'm the opposite. I say things I shouldn't say all the dang time. Probably shouldn't have said dang. Somebody might have got offended. I don't know, but I said it because my mouth is always getting me in trouble. We get it out of order. We're quick to speak. And as a result, listen to me, as a result of being quick to speak, we are slow to listen and quick to get angry. If you are quick to speak, 100% of the time, if you're quick to speak, you are going to be slow to listen. Now listen, if you're slow to speak, you're going to be quicker to listen. Just by default, by human nature. But if you're quick to speak, you have no choice but to be slow to listen. And when you're slow to listen and quick to speak, you're going to get quick to anger. You ever find yourself in an argument with somebody and at the end of the argument you're mad, you want to punch a hole in the wall? Maybe you did. I don't know. I'm not here to judge. But you threw a glass, you got mad, you punched a hole in the wall. You're just so filled with rage, you're shaking. Anybody you ever get so mad you've shook before? Anybody you ever get in an argument and you got so angry and then you left the room and an hour later you're like, why was I arguing? Anybody ever have that happen before? You're like, what was that fight about? I don't even remember what the problem was. It's so funny to me that, and I do this all the time too, I am preaching to myself tonight, that we get into arguments and fights and we don't even remember what it was about. How do we find ourselves there? We were quick to speak and slow to listen. And because we were slow to listen, we don't even remember what the problem was because we jumped right to the defensive. We jumped right to the argumentative. We jumped right to the offense. Are you with me? Yeah. And because of that, we immediately arrived at anger and we didn't even have time to process the conversation to a point where it could sink in and we could remember it longer than that room. Are you with me? To where 15 minutes later, 20 minutes later, an hour later, the next day, we don't even remember what we were arguing about because we weren't actually listening, we were just speaking. And sometimes because we think faster than we can think, we automatically think of a response without processing what somebody has said. You ever do this in a conversation where somebody is saying something and automatically you have something to say and you cut them off? You don't even know where they were going with their statement. If you find yourself in lots of conflict, I would submit to you that it's probably because you're not listening. If you find yourself in lots of arguments, if you find yourself mad at everybody around you, let me submit to you, it's probably because you're not listening. Nobody around me loves me. They're always telling me that I need to stop this behavior and I'm sick of hearing about it. See, you're not listening to what they're trying to tell you. What they're trying to tell you is what you're doing is going to hurt you. What you're doing is going to damage yourself or others. But you're so quick to speak and so slow to listen that you arrive at anger immediately. And because of that, you'll never hear the wisdom that their words could carry to your heart. Am I speaking to anybody tonight? I have something that I want you to, if you have the ability to write this down, write it down. You can write it down under James chapter 1, verses 19 if you want. Until we understand, we are just assuming. Until we understand, we are just assuming. I'm going to say it one more time. I want you to remember this. Until we understand, we are just assuming. Until you understand where somebody's coming from, you're just making assumptions about their motives. Until you understand the heart behind what somebody is trying to say, you're just making assumptions about why they're saying it. Until you understand why somebody is upset, you're just assuming about why they're upset. Until you understand somebody's past trauma or what they've experienced, you're just assuming why they're upset in this situation today. Until we understand, we're just assuming, and we will never understand. Therefore, we will always assume and always arrive immediately at anger until we learn to be slow to speak and quick to listen. We have to be slow to speak and quick to listen. And I want you to understand something. It's not enough to just listen. Like listening, when I say listen, I'm not talking about the mechanics of your eardrum processing vibrations and converting it into a language. Do you understand what I'm saying? When I talk about listening, I'm talking about hearing. I'm talking about understanding. Because people in any conversation, whether it's us or somebody else, we want to be both heard and understood. We want to be both heard and understood. Have you ever gotten a conversation with somebody and said, "You're not listening to me," and they're like, "Yes, I am," and then they just repeated back to you what you just said? And you're like, no. The problem is you're using the wrong words. They are listening, they're just not understanding you. Because their mind is registering the vowels and consonants and syllables, and it can binarily repeat it back to you, but emotionally it hasn't connected with the heart of the person that is expressing it. Am I preaching to anybody tonight? In any conversation, we want to be both heard and understood. That's why Jesus said to anybody who has ears to hear, let him hear. Jesus said, if you have ears to hear, then you need to hear. Because some of you guys, you have ears to hear, but you're not using them to hear. You have ears, but you're not receiving in this information. You have somebody that's been giving you wisdom time and time again, and you sit down on their couch, and your ears are open, and you're processing words, but you're not allowing those words to translate into wisdom that causes you to shift your behavior or your thought patterns. Are you with me? And you can have this conversation with somebody over and over and over again, but until you allow your ears that you have to hear, then what are we doing but wasting time? And Jesus is saying, if you have ears to hear, you need to hear. Some of you, you come to church week in, week out, and I preach a message to you again and again, and you guys can leave, and you can quote something that I said, but have you heard it? Some of you, you can open up the Bible, and you can see the Bible giving wisdom for your life, the Bible directing you towards a relationship with God. And you can read those words that promise life, that promise joy, that promise change. You can read these things time and time again, and you read them, and your brain registers the language, but you're not hearing them because you're not allowing it to sink into the soil of your heart. John chapter 8, verses 47 says this. John 8:47 says, anyone who belongs to God listens gladly to the words of God. But you don't listen because you don't belong to God. What does that mean? Anybody can quote a Bible verse back, but only somebody that belongs to God can walk a Bible verse out. Do you hear what I just said tonight? Anybody can quote a Bible verse, but only those that are in God can live a Bible verse. And what is being said here is that it's not enough to know the words of God. You've got to listen. You've got to listen. You've got to listen. What this verse tells me is that when we're not listening, it's actually deeper than a mental issue. See, sometimes, and you see this a lot in couples with husbands and wives, where you'll get into an argument because your spouse isn't listening to you. Usually, let's be honest, guys, it's us. You know what I mean? Like we're gone. We're playing a video game in our mind. We're reliving the glory days when we used to be able to do a skateboard trick, you know? We're thinking about when we're hanging out with the guys, when we're going fishing, whatever. But when we're not listening, listen to me tonight. When we're not listening, it's not just about what's happening between our ears. Because us not listening, our lack of listening, is actually a reflection of the posture of our hearts. So the problem isn't really here, the problem is here. So let's go back to the husband and wife analogy. Wives, you get into an argument with your husband because you're trying to tell him about something that upset you today, and he's not listening. You get into an argument because you're like, you're not listening to me, and we're having a conversation about what's going on in here. But in reality, we need to dig a little bit below the neck and dig into what's happening in here. Because there was a time when he used to listen, and you weren't any more interesting then than you are now. You understand me? You're the same person. I mean, you've grown and all that stuff, yeah, but there was a time when the posture of his heart was aligned towards you, but as the years have gone on, he's begun to take you for granted. I'm not meaning to start any marriage counseling tonight. You guys are like, we need to talk. But there was a time when he used to listen, but the posture of his heart has shifted towards other things, and you guys need to have a conversation, not an angry conversation. You need to listen and understand why his heart shifted from here to fish. Are you with me? You need to understand that in the same way that he needs to understand what you're going through. But the conversation needs to move the 10 or so inches from here to here. Because not listening is a reflection of the posture of our hearts. We don't want to listen because listening would require us to examine our hearts. Are you with me tonight? When you listen to when you truly listen to somebody, when somebody is upset with you and they're sharing their pain and they're sharing their hurt, it's easy for you to just be quick to speak, because if you're slow to speak and quick to listen, that means that you might actually have to change. Am I talking to anybody in this room tonight? Say amen if I'm talking to you tonight. That means you might actually have to change if you would listen. Listening, truly listening, can require us to examine our hearts. And we don't like listening because deep down we know that listening might require change. And nobody likes to change because change is uncomfortable. Change is difficult. That's why when Jesus said, let him who has ears to hear, hear, what he is saying is you guys enjoy coming to the sermons. You enjoy the healings. You enjoy the fishes and the loaves. You enjoy the life lessons and the stories and the parables and the camaraderie. You enjoy the escapism from the day-to-day life. But I need you to actually hear what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is going to require you to lay down everything else and follow me. Because that's at the core of the message of Christ. To turn your back on your desires, to turn your back on the things that you are pursuing, and to truly, fully, entirely, completely follow Christ. If you have ears to hear, you need to hear. And it's difficult for us to hear because we know that when I get into this conversation with my spouse and she's upset and she's telling me about why she's upset, if I listen, that means that my behavior might have to change, and I'm gonna have to get uncomfortable, and I'm gonna have to help out more, and I'm gonna have to do this, I'm gonna have to do that, and I really don't want to. So if I could just not listen, then I can avoid the discomfort and the change. When my best friend is telling me that relationship is toxic, and I know the words that are coming out of my mouth, and it's registering, but I'm not listening, because if I listen, I'm gonna have to break up with them, and I really don't want to, because I know that they're toxic, but I'm lonely. And so I don't want to listen right now because my loneliness outweighs the necessity for me to receive the wisdom that you're trying to bring into my life. And I know you're thinking about my future, but I'm thinking about my present, so I'm not trying to hear what you're trying to say. Did it get heavy in here like all of a sudden? I feel like we were light and we were having fun and I was your buddy and now you guys are like, I don't like him very much. Listen, sometimes we're afraid of listening. Because we're like, man, if I listen, then that means I agree with you. Listen, listening isn't agreement. It's not agreement. Understanding isn't permission. They're two completely different things. I don't want to understand you because I don't want you to feel like I'm putting my stamp of approval on you. I'm not asking you for your stamp of approval. I'm asking you to see where I'm coming from. Don't be afraid to be open to a conversation. Don't be afraid of the possibility of correction or growth. Listen, not everything that somebody brings to you is going to be what you need to hear, but you can still listen and understand. So, I don't want to just preach a message to you without giving you some practical advice. So I want to give you 3 practical steps to learn how to listen. Are you guys ready for these steps? 3 practical steps on learning how to listen. If you're taking notes tonight, take notes. Write this down. The first step in learning how to listen is to turn down the noise. Turn down the noise. Turn down the noise. What do I mean by that? There is more noise now than at any other point in human history. Like, we're consuming information constantly. Like, you guys remember, like in my lifetime, when I wanted the news, and I didn't want the news in that part of my lifetime. But if I was younger and I wanted the news, which I didn't, I would have to what? I'd have to wait for the news to come on. And the news came on at what time? 6 o'clock. And then 10 o'clock. But I had to wait for the news, and then the news came in these tiny pockets. Today, if I want the news, what do? I type the word news. That's it. I pull out my iPad or my cell phone, and I look up the news. I have constant access to information. I don't know about you, but I am constantly consuming information. Does anybody else do this? I take my phone into the shower with me, and I listen to podcasts or sermons. Anybody else do that? You take your phone into the shower? Just me? I'm weird. I'm constantly listening. Some of you guys do it with music.
In the shower, in the bathroom, though.
Bro, I go in the shower. I got a waterproof phone, bro. I'm not playing around. I got no fear with that phone. I put it up. I got a little shelf in my shower. I put it up there, and I'm listening to stuff. I'm getting clean and getting educated. But I'm constantly consuming information. And we're constantly listening to things. I think about my day. My day starts off with me taking a shower. I take my phone in. I'm listening to a podcast. I hop into my car. I plug my phone into my car, and I'm listening to a sermon on my way here. I get to church. I'm having meetings with people. I'm talking with people. I leave church. I go home. I talk to my wife. I have a conversation with her. She goes to bed. I pull out a book. I start reading a book. And then the next day, I repeat the process all over again. I'm constantly consuming information. And listen, we have to be honest with the fact that we have what's called listening bandwidth. Like, if you guys know, like a hose, like you can only fit so much water through that hose. You're not fitting any more than the circumference of that hose. We all have a limited amount of bandwidth. You can listen to multiple sounds at once, but you can only pay attention to one at a time. Are you hearing what I'm saying tonight? Which conversations are you paying attention to? So many of us, we have the volume turned up on every audio source in our life. And now I'm not talking literally, I'm talking conversationally. We have the volume turned up on every source in our life, and we're not listening to the right voices. Anybody, you ever have 2 sounds playing at once? Somebody saying go there, somebody saying don't. Somebody saying they're good for you, somebody saying they're not. Somebody saying follow God, some people saying run away. Somebody saying don't say that, somebody else saying you better say that. Day in, day out. We have to learn how to turn down the wrong voices and turn up the right voices. Amen. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 6 through 11. This is the story of the fourth king of Israel, a king named Rehoboam. This is the grandson of King David. This is the son of King Solomon, King Rehoboam. This is an example of listening to the wrong voice. 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 6 through 11. It says this, "Then King Rehoboam discussed the matter with the older men who had counseled his father Solomon." Listen, the Bible says that Solomon is the wisest king that ever lived. So he's doing something smart by talking to the people that advised the wise guy. It says, he discussed the matter with the older men who had counseled his father Solomon, and he said, "What is your advice?" he asked. "How should I answer these people?" The old counselors replied, "If you're willing to be a servant to these people today, give them a favorable answer, then they will always be your loyal subjects." Now that's good advice, isn't it? He's talking to these old, distinguished, established men who have counseled his father, who was a wise king. And he's saying, how should I handle these people? And they give him good advice. They say, listen, if you treat them right today, they will always respect you. If you give them a favorable answer, they will be your loyal subjects. That would be a good voice for him to listen to. But in verse 8 it says this, "But Rehoboam rejected the advice of the older men and instead asked the opinion of young men who had grown up with him and were now his advisors." I want to let you know, if you're asking advice from people that have grown up with you, you're not thinking outside the box. Hello? If you're asking advice from the people that are in your circle, you're not going to get any smarter. Are you with me? You're going to get really stagnant in your wisdom because you guys are only feeding from each other instead of fishing outside. See, the wisdom in asking the older men was they had lived a generation, they had lived a life, they had served his father, they hadn't grown up with him, they thought differently than he did. But he goes to people who had grown up with him. What does that tell you? He's not looking to listen, he's looking to find somebody that confirms his own opinions. And he says this, "What is your advice?" he asked the young men. "How should I answer these people who want me to lighten the burdens imposed by my father?" Verse 10 says, "The young men replied, 'This is what you should tell these complainers who want a light burden. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist.'" I guess that was like a burn back in the day. Now it just sounds real awkward. If somebody says that to me in real life, I'm like, okay, bye-bye. "My father laid heavy burdens on you, but I'm going to make them even heavier. My father beat you with whips, but I will beat you with scorpions." Dang. These are some like medieval burns and insults, but like these guys are a little crazy. These guys immediately give him bad advice. They're like, you know what you need to do? You need to not de-escalate the situation. You need to escalate that bad boy. Make them mad. You know what you tell those little complainers? You ever have somebody in your life that's like that? Where you take them an issue and they immediately jump to the negative and they fuel the negative and they tell you that you should lash out? Cut that person off. Bye, Felicia. Get out of my life. I don't want your information no more. You toxic. Turn down the noise. You need to silence the voice of the people that think like you in your destructive thought patterns, and you need to turn up the voices that are calling you to what's difficult but wise. Number two, you ready for number two? I'm coming to a close, guys. Pay attention with me tonight. Number two, if you want to learn how to listen, the first one is to turn down the noise. The second is ask questions. Like, this is something that we all know, but we don't do. We don't ask questions very much, do we? Because we're afraid of somebody thinking that we're stupid. You ever, guys, like just drive and you just kept driving, and then you were driving some more, and you're driving some more, and then your girl's like, You wanna stop and ask for some direct? No! Ask questions. It's amazing to me as a pastor how many people will call me up and say, Pastor, I need help. Pastor, will you help me? Pastor, will you help me? And I'll be like, yes, of course, I'll help you. How can I help you? And I'll sit down with them. It's like, I really need some advice. Okay, I'm here. What do you need? Well, and then we'll talk for an hour. But when I say we'll talk for an hour, I mean they'll talk for an hour. And then at the end, they'll be like, thank you so much, Pastor. I feel so much better. And then they'll get up and leave. I'm like, you're no better than when you came in here. You just feel better because you wanted to talk. But you weren't interested in changing your situation because you didn't listen and you didn't ask questions. Because when you ask questions, you're afraid you might not like the answers. But when we ask questions, we're listening. So when somebody is upset with you, instead of just jumping to the defensive, ask them, I really don't understand. Can you help me understand? Okay, why do you feel that way? Okay, can you help me understand what I did that got you there? Okay, I'm still having difficulty understanding. Can you give me an example? Okay, and I'm not asking for an example so that I can shoot that example down. I'm asking for an example because I want to understand. When we start asking questions, how did this happen? When did that start? What can I do to help you? Now we're starting to listen. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 7 says, the beginning of wisdom is this, get wisdom. Get it. Though it costs you all you have, get understanding. How do I get wisdom? Except by asking. You want to know why kids develop so much so quickly? Have you guys ever noticed, like little kids, they go from pooping in their pants and not being able to speak to being able to go to the bathroom and form complex sentences in a short amount of time? Why? What do kids always do? Why? 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 What's that? What's that? Why? You ever have a conversation with a kid and the whys just won't stop coming? It's time to go to bed. Why? Because the sun went down. Why? Because it's a sphere and the earth is rotating on an axis. Why? Because there needed to be morning and evening and seasons. Why? Because God. Why? Like, and you just get to a point where now we're I need to call like Stephen Hawking. I need a physicist to come in here to answer your questions because now we've got to like the meaning of life. And I just want you to go to bed because it's now 12 o'clock at night and I got to work tomorrow. And you're still asking why. And then Jesus looked at adults and said, we need to be more like little children, for such is the kingdom of God. Because God's not afraid of you coming in and saying, why? Why? Pray. Why? So that you can draw close to me. Why? Because I love you. Why? Because I created you with intention, with care. Why? Because I'm your Father. And as you start digging into God, you start listening, you start understanding, you start to find the answers. Are you with me tonight? We start asking questions. The beginning of wisdom is to get wisdom. We get wisdom by asking questions. My final point tonight, if you want to learn how to listen, is this: be still. Be still. Be still, y'all. Be still. In Psalm chapter 62, verses 5, it says this: let all that I am wait quietly before God, for my hope is in Him. Let all that I am wait quietly before God, because my hope is in Him. See, I think that some of the reasons why we have turmoil in our relationship with God and we don't really understand the heart of God is because we're not being still enough to listen. We're not being still enough to listen. We come running to God every time there's a problem, every time something goes wrong, and we start just talking to God. Talk, and we're not being still and waiting on God and listening. God, speak to me. Speak to me. Samuel, when he was a young boy, learned very quickly the first time he heard the voice of God to go and say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Sometimes we just need to be still and listen to the voice of God. And if we listen, I believe that we will hear him. There's a story I want to tell you in closing. Amy, if you're back there, you can come up and start playing the piano. But there's a story of a young boy and a watch. And there was, back in the day before we had refrigeration, they had what was called ice houses. And an ice house would be a room that was completely sealed shut. The door would shut tightly, and there was no way for light to get in. And what they would do is, during winter, they would harvest giant chunks of ice, and they would bring them into the ice house, and they would put it in the ice house, and they would cover it with sawdust. And that would allow them to put meat and things in there, and it would keep it cold well into the summer. That was before they had modern refrigeration. So they would harvest these giant chunks of ice, bring them in, cover them in sawdust, and then the ice would last for months and months and months and months, almost until the next winter. So this would allow them to keep meat cold and allow them to preserve their food. And one day there was a man that was working in the ice house, and he had a fine pocket watch. And this is one of those old pocket watches with the gears and the dials and all this stuff, and it was so beautiful and it was so valuable. And he was in the ice house, and while he was working in the ice house, the pocket watch fell out of his pocket, and he didn't realize it. And as they were moving around, some sawdust that they would put to preserve the ice got kicked over it, and it got obscured. So at the end of the day, he checks for his watch to see what time it was, and he realizes that his watch is missing. So he begins to frantically look around the ice house, and he calls all of his friends, and they go in with lanterns, and they take rakes, and they're moving the sawdust around, and they're trying to find his watch. So valuable to him, and they're searching for it, and they can't find it anywhere, and they spend an hour looking, and they can't. And they had finally gotten to a point where they had given up. "We're just not going to find this watch." And a little boy says, "I think I can find it." And so they say, "Knock yourself out. We're going to go and rest." And they leave the ice house, and the little boy goes to the door of the ice house, and he closes the door. He has no light inside. It's completely cut off from any light. Closes the door. And he goes inside and goes into the middle of the room, and he lays down. And he's in there for all of 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes, he comes out with the watch, and everybody is astounded. "How did you find it in 5 minutes when all of us looked for it for hours and we couldn't find it?" The boy said, "I went inside, and I closed the door, and I laid down, and I listened. And when I listened, I could hear the ticking of the clock. And all I had to do was listen and feel my way to the sound." I want to let you know right now, God speaks to every one of us. Some of us, we're just going crazy searching for God through the sawdust with our lanterns and our rakes and our friends and our Bible studies and all the noise. When what we need to do is push all that stuff out and just close the door and just say, "God, just speak to me. I'm going to sit here as long as it takes, but I need to feel your presence. I need to hear your voice tonight." If you're in here tonight, if you would close your eyes.